From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, I'm Joel Achenbach with the Washington Post, here with Michael Lewis. Washington Post is a sponsor of the festival. Can you hear me? I'm hearing an echo. Can you hear me? It's all good? Okay. We just found out that Michael is supposed to do a PowerPoint presentation, so that's going to take us about half an hour to find the PowerPoint presentation he forgot to bring. Okay. But thank you for being here. Thank you to the Library of Congress. Thank you to David Rubenstein, the chairman of the festival. And we're going to have a little chat here, just a couple of old friends along with 1 million other new acquaintances here in the hall. So Michael and I go way back, and let's just start out talking about, you were an art history major at Princeton, right? And then you go off to Wall Street, and you do really, really well at Salomon Brothers. And Michael, you could have been rich. You know, I mean, you could have your own plane at this point. And instead, you went into the book business. Now, tell us why you did that, how'd that come about?
So, Joel and I were classmates in college. It is actually just an accident. He was asked to interview me. They thought we would be good together. They didn't know we knew each other. And this is an opportunity for Joel to express all the resentments he feels.
That's right, yes. Yes. This is actually the Undoing Project.
This is the Undoing Project.
Joel and Michael.
At the fact that yes. But so the question is why I quit Wall Street. So I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life when I was in college. Unlike you knew you wanted to be a journalist and a writer. When I got out, you know, I didn't have any plan. It didn't occur to me, I think partly because of how I grew up. I grew up in New Orleans where nobody really did anything for a living. So it didn't occur to me that I would have to. So hence art history, right? I mean, it was a place where careers go to die. But it was a great place to study, and I loved it, and I did it because I loved it. When I got out as a result, I didn't have any kind of plan. And the job on Wall Street fell into my lap, and it was a way to make a living. But by the time I got it, I had figured out I wanted to write. And there was a kind of 2-year gap in there.
How did you figure that out? What made you think?
You know, it was when you had to write a senior thesis like I did at Princeton. You had to basically write a book to get out of Princeton. And I immersed myself in that, and I loved it like I loved no other academic experience. And I kind of made the jump in my mind, well, this would be a good thing to do forever if you could. The false start I had was I thought it meant an academic career. And the guy who supervised the thesis not only told me that I wasn't made for an academic career, when I asked him at the end of my thesis defense, because I was feeling a little vain about the writing, what he thought about the writing. He said, put it this way, never try to make a living at it.
So his whole life is now revenge against this
one guy. And his name, so you know, William A.P. Childs is his name. If you see that man.
Where is he now? No one's heard of him.
He was great, actually. He's a wonderful professor, archaeologist. But so I got out and I was flat. I started just to kind of submit willy-nilly magazine pieces to magazines. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anybody who wrote for a living. It was a quixotic enterprise. There was a book, I don't know if you remember, there used to be a book called The Writer's Market, and it was about that thick, and it had the names and addresses of all the editors in America. And for some reason, I got it in my head that the easiest thing I might be able to break into was in-flight magazines. and so I was volunteering at the soup kitchen on the Bowery Missions and Young Men's Home, and I thought the street people were so interesting. I started to get to know the homeless people, and I wrote a piece about New York homeless people, and I sent it to all the in-flight magazines in America.
Right.
And I remember I got this letter back from Delta Airlines, and it said, you know, we kind of like the piece, but you do understand what we're in the business of doing. We're trying to get people to go places, not flee them. And we don't publish pieces about homeless people.
Right.
So it took me a while to figure out the market. but eventually I started to get some things in print. An editor in Washington basically gave me my start. The Economist in London gave me my start. But then Michael Kinsley, who was editing the New Republic, I cold called him. I was a graduate student in London and said, I really want to write for your magazine. He gave me a chance. He published a couple of things. But then I get this job on Wall Street. And the job on Wall Street promises a fortune. I mean, it doesn't sound like a fortune now, but it was, it was $100,000 a year the first year. And you put that in today's, just a couple of $100,000.
You were like 25, 26?
I was 23 when I got the job.
23.
And I just thought, this is incredible. I mean, I have to go do this just to see what it is. But by then I knew I wanted to write for a living. So I have a friend who's from my Salomon Brothers training class, and you joke about like I could have been rich, but the people in my Salomon Brothers training class pity me. That they all went and actually hit Wall Street at just the right time to get really, really rich. But I have a friend, he says, that when we met the first day of class, he introduced himself and he started telling me how he wanted to go into mortgage bonds and whatever. And I said, my name is Michael Lewis and I'm here to write a book. And that I already had it in mind that I was going to write about this place. And I might have had that in at least the back of my mind. And I wrote while I was there. This is a longer answer than you want, but this is how the book career happened. While I was there, I started to writing. I continued to write about other things, but I started to publish pieces about Wall Street. And I put a piece on the op-ed of the Wall Street Journal that had at the bottom, Michael Lewis is an associate with Salomon Brothers in London. And the piece argued that investment bankers were overpaid. And I was working in London, and I came into work the next day, and the head of Salomon Brothers Europe was sitting at my desk. And he happened to be a great guy, happened to be the guy who gave me my job. And he was ashen. And he said, do you realize what you've done? I said, you got a piece in the journal. It's great, kind of thing. And he says, no. He says, we have had a crisis meeting with the board of directors of Salomon Brothers to talk about how we're going to deal with this piece because it's being reprinted in all these local newspapers around the country. And he says, we're getting calls. And I said, I kind of thought, wow, that's great, But he said, no. He said, this is a big, big problem. He said, he wasn't going to fire me. Oddly, different era. He wasn't going to fire me yet. But he kind of sat down he said, how are we going to fix this problem? And I said, you tell me. He says, well, the way we could fix it is you don't write anymore. And I said, nah, it's not going to happen. I'm going to keep writing. And he was fond of me. He wanted me to stay. He said, well, what if you wrote under a different name? And I said, instantly, it came into my mind. I said, what if I wrote under the name Diana Bleecker, which is my mother's maiden name? He goes, perfect. No one around here will ever think a woman is a man. They'll never make the connection. So do it, fine. So I started to just write with abandon, including stuff I was seeing right around me, under the name Diana Bleecker. And one day I get home from work, and Diana Bleecker's career is taking off. Because people want to read about Wall Street in 1987. I get home from work one day, and there's a phone call. And the actor Chevy Chase, remember him? His dad, Ned Chase, was an editor at Simon & Schuster, very distinguished book editor. And it's him. And he says, I found out that you're Diana Bleecker. And he said, I think you should write a book. You don't have to do it for me. I'd love it if you came in here, but you should write a book. And from that moment, that was in September of 1987, I was out the door. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And the money didn't matter. And then what happened next was kind of funny because you're not going to have to ask anyone.
No, I am the potted plant.
Yes. The carrot. Yeah. You're the carrot in the school play. So so what happened next was I waited till they gave me my bonus at the end of the year because I didn't want to just lose that. Right. It was a huge pile of money. And I then said, I'm leaving to write a book, And they said, what are you going to write about? I said, I'm going to write about Wall Street. And I wasn't quite sure what Liar's Poker was going to look like. They took me into a room, and they didn't care that I was writing a book about Wall Street. That wasn't what concerned them. They thought I was out of my mind. They said, you do understand that, you made $250 this year, and next year it's like $500. and then after that, it's millions of dollars a year. You can stay here for another decade, and in 10 years, you won't have to work, and then you can write your books, basically. And they said, don't do this to yourself. They felt sorry for me. But I was so out the door that it didn't even occur to me to listen to it. I was so enamored with the process I was so amused with myself, as now, with what happened when I sat down and wrote, and with a blank sheet of paper. So, and when you're 24 or 25, what was I then? I was 26 then. It's, you kind of go with your gut.
So this will not work for everyone, this career path. But certainly being self-amused is a good personality trait for this business. And
there's no question.
I have some props here. I have a bunch of Michael's books, and this is The Big Short, which everyone knows this book. And
thank you.
Tons of fans. At the end of the book is an actually incredibly harrowing encounter with John Gutfreund,
now, may he rest in peace.
May he rest in peace, your former boss. And just reading that passage, I reread it again this morning. Tell us, there's a moment where your old boss says, Liar's Poker made your career and ruined mine.
He put it in slightly different terms. He said, and the reason I went to go see him was, it seemed clear to me when I wrote that was a bookend, that I had come in, that a lot of the forces that had led to the financial crisis had been set in motion by Salomon Brothers in some cases, while I was on Wall Street. And we were watching the end of a process that John Gutfreund had helped put in motion. And the big one was turning these the Wall Street partnerships into corporations. But and he led.
Was it scary though to see him?
Well, it was terrifying. And he booked a table for two at his favorite restaurant around the corner from his house when I sent him a note saying, I'd love to sit down with you. He said yes, but he didn't say much more than that. He said, meet me at that table. And I got there on time, and he did not. And the table was one of those tables where you sit together with your legs together, like you're on a date. And I sat down and I started to sweat. I thought, what is this? He set this up so we're going to sit like this for 2 hours. He walks in, and he says, first thing he says is, your fucking book. Your fucking book made your career, and it ruined mine. And I said,
and then you had a lovely lunch after that.
No, I said that seems a misinterpretation of history to me. That I don't think my book ruined your career. It didn't help, but it didn't ruin your career. And then we settled in, and I'd see him from time to time after that, and he was very genial. And he'd tell me, in fact, that since Liar's Poker came out, he always kept a box of the books under his desk to sign them for people when they came to his office. So,
all right, that's a win.
So that
okay,
was
that's
not.
A win.
It was yes.
Okay.
He said something like, "I'm your biggest customer."
So you gave the commencement speech at Princeton a few years back, and you said. You described yourself as lucky and said some people are just lucky. And those of us who know you well, you work incredibly hard, right? I mean, you were like a very hard worker. You have an incredible gift for telling a story. You write in the vernacular. I mean, lucky, no, you're not lucky. But what has been your secret, you think, in terms of finding stories, not only that people want to read, but that no one else has told? I mean, the Big Short being the classic example. We'd all been writing about the financial crisis, the Great Recession, and you come in with something that no one else really had written. So how do you find this stuff?
All right, so I'll answer that question, but it's not true that I'm not lucky. I mean, there's an incredible serendipity in my career. The fact that I wanted to be a writer and I got this job in the very best place on earth to write about Wall Street in the 1980s. I was not only in the firm, but the place in the firm. I was given the leisure by my parents to fart around for 2 or 3 years after college. If they hadn't done that, I doubt I would have become a writer.
Okay, you had some advantages.
Huge advantages.
Huge advantage.
And the point of that speech was, there's this odd conceit in our culture that once you've made it, that it was inevitable because of the virtue of you. And that in fact, that's not how it works. Obama was right when he said you didn't build it. You were such the recipient of benefits that this culture bestows on you, and not to tell the story without a high level of awareness of that. That's what I was trying to get across to these Princeton kids, because I think it's getting harder and harder to see how lucky you are. Anyway,
Okay,
so the stories.
Okay, but let me reload the question. So yes, you had a lot of advantages, and you had the freedom to kind of look around and improvise. But you also found these stories that no one else saw. The classic one, I think, is The Blind Side. Tell us how you.
So the book of
a friend of yours told you such and such, and suddenly you've got an incredible book that becomes a movie.
So The Blind Side, it is typical of how I find stories, in that you'll see that it's just chance. I chance into stories. Big Short maybe is slightly different. But The Blind Side, what happened, it started with a bottle of wine and a New York Times Magazine editor named Jerry Maserati. And we were sitting in New York, and I remember the restaurant, and he says, we're trying to decide what I'm going to write next, cover story for the New York Times Magazine. And it was whatever it was, 2005 or 4, or around there. And he was thinking, important people. He was thinking Jamie Dimon. He was thinking, it never really interests me. And I said, if you want me to write about someone important, let me write about the teacher who changed my life. I mean, nobody knows who he is. Put him on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. And he happened to be my baseball coach, but he was a teacher. And so he said, okay, go do it. And while I was doing that, I thought, well, I'm going to write about this personal story about this coach. I had to talk to some of the people on my team. I was the pitcher on the team. Sean Toohey, who's played by Tim McGraw in the movie The Blind Side, it was the catcher. So I went to see him. And I hadn't seen him since high school. And he picks me up at the Memphis airport. He'd been this poor boy in high school. He sometimes had not had enough to eat. He'd made great good of himself. He was a wonderful athlete. He was drafted to play in the NBA. He was drafted by the Cincinnati Reds in high school. And he'd gone on to make a fortune in the fast food business. He wanted to show me his mansion. He took me to his mansion, and we spoke for 2 hours or so about our old coach. And the whole time, in his living room, there was a 6'5", 350-pound black kid who didn't say a word and who was not introduced to me. He was like you were when I was monologuing.
Right, exactly. Right.
He was the carrot in the school play. Yeah. And on the way back to the airport, I said, Sean, who is the black kid? And he said, oh, that's Leanne's project, her new project. And he started to get a little teary. He said, we saw him, he was standing on the bus stop in the snow, in T-shirt and shorts, and she recognized him as someone who had just come to the kid's school, and she stopped and said, what are you doing out there in shorts and a T-shirt? She put him in the car and drove him home, and he hasn't left. And it turned out that he had no family. He was living on the streets, nothing to eat, was illiterate, and Leanne Toohey, rich, white, evangelical Republican living on the outskirts of a very racially divided city, said, I'm gonna fix him. And I'm gonna make him a rich, white, evangelical Christian. And that's what and Sean was just amused by it. He says, don't get in her way. He says, she's gonna do it, she's gonna do it. And I just started following. And I thought, that's odd. It's Pygmalion. It's Pygmalion in Memphis. And I thought, I'll just follow that. So can I finish how the book comes about? Because that's not a book. I just thought, that's interesting. Curious thing. And I just want to know more. Flash forward a few weeks. Moneyball had come out not that long before. I got to be friends with the brain trusts, such as they were, in several NFL front offices. Some of them actually were brain trusts. Some of them you wouldn't trust their brains. But the brain trust at the 49ers was great. And he and I started to have a Moneyball-like conversation about football. And he said, there's not a Moneyball story in football that's the same story, because everybody has basically the same amount of money to spend. So they're not the rich teams and the poor teams. It's not about thinking how to do more with less. He says, what it is about is figuring out how to distribute your money across the field. And I said, well, can you get me a history of how that's happened since free agency created a market? And he pulled it out. And it was really remarkable that you had this character on the offensive line, the left tackle, who protected the quarterback's blind side, whose salary had gone from the lowest paid on the field, along with the other linemen no one knew, to the second highest after the quarterback, because he was the insurance policy on the most valuable asset. Because if the quarterback got hit from that side, he could get hurt in a way that he wouldn't normally. And I thought, that's interesting. Flash forward 6 or 8 months. I've been hearing about Michael Orr down in Memphis, and the stories are getting rich and emotional, but I don't think it's not my story. It's my old high school friend doing something odd. And Sean calls me and says, you're not going to believe what just happened. There was a lot of that. He'd call and say, you're not going to believe what just happened. Nick Saban, Alabama head coach, but he was then the LSU head coach, came through school. He was looking at some players at our school, and he saw Michael on a basketball court, and Sean knew Nick. And he said, Sean, who is that kid? That's a future NFL left tackle. You can see just from the way he moves, he's an NFL left tackle. And I said, Sean, do you know what they get paid? He said, no. He just said that's what he was. And I told him the story about the NFL financial story. And then I started to think, well, there's a story here. And the story is, because the kid then went. The moment he was identified as the future NFL left tackle, which he indeed became, he was like the most prized kid in the universe. He'd gone from the least valued 15-year-old on earth to the most valued 17-year-old in a flash. And I thought, there's a story that can be organized along these lines. What are the forces in the kid's life that change his value? And one of those forces is stuff that happened in NFL strategy, but one of those forces is a mother. And once I realized that, I had a story, and this always happens. I had it for 6 months before I had the nerve to say, yeah, I'm gonna write it. Because I kind of thought, I often think there's someone better to write this. Someone who actually has empathy, or someone who actually knows emotions, or someone who knows about psychology, or someone who knows. There's always some part of the story where I think it's alien to me, so I really shouldn't be the one to do it. But the truth is, the fact that it's alien to you is why you should do it, because it enables you to get across to other people to whom it's alien the stuff about it that's interesting. So what pushed me over the edge was Sean came out. He was a color commentator for the Memphis Grizzlies. And he came out, they were playing the Warriors, we went to dinner, and he started telling my wife and I some of the stories. The one he mentioned to my wife, he had not said to me, was, it was interesting when Michael came into the house, because we took him into a room, and Leanne showed him his bed, and he just stared at it. And she said, what? She says, I've never had a bed. He was 15 years old and he never had a bed. And my wife started crying, and then she got in the car and she said afterwards, you're an idiot if you do anything but write this book. And so I started to write the book. But that it sounds like a one-off kind of thing, but that's happened to me in various forms over and over and over.
You have a common theme of unrecognized value in several of your books. I mean, is that a conscious thing you shoot for? And you think to yourself, this book, every business person in America is going to buy my book at the airport, okay, for their next flight. Because what you're sort of saying is, with Moneyball, The Blind Side, The Big Short is, and really with the new book, The Undoing Project, think differently about this. There's value out there if you can recognize it. Is that a conscious theme you have?
No. It is a theme. What does seem to happen a lot, and I don't quite know why. I mean, I can guess why, but the books do come back to markets a lot, and the way markets don't function sometimes very well. Markets are miraculous in a lot of ways, but so value comes from market, the value that the market assigns. And so a lot of the stories do have a kind of market angle to them. And I think I've always been, since I left New Orleans, always been bemused by what gets valued and why. Because I came from a place that was a very charming place to grow up. It was a really rich, interesting childhood. I loved it, and I loved the people. I love the culture, I love the people, I love the place, and it was a failed place. It was not valued. And so the fact that you see this over and over, people who are special who don't get valued properly. And there are people who are distinctly not special who get valued very highly. And that so that has always interested me since I was a little kid. Really interested me. My father told me not that long ago. He introduced me to the stock market, in which I've never had an interest and still don't have much of an interest. But he's obsessed with it. Like, he likes to watch his portfolio, just watch it. And I don't get that. It's like, so he's watching his portfolio and he's saying, I'm going to give you 10 shares of a stock so you can learn how to watch it too, you know. And I was 13 or 14 years old, and he gave me a little black book in which to keep the record of what I saw when I was watching it. And he gave me 10 shares of Chart House, which was a restaurant company. And I think he gave it to me because we had some New Orleans restaurants were owned by Chart House. And I looked at it, and it was $20 a share, but he'd paid $220. And I said, well, it's 10 shares, and it's $20 a share, so it's $200. What's the other $20? And he says, well, that's what we had to pay to Sandy Villery to buy the stock. And I said, I'm going to go egg his house. That's outrageous. And it's just outrageous. He charges $20 for us to go buy. What does he do? He just makes probably a phone call. How did that happen? And I remember being outraged at the value assigned to that role, even back then. So.
And then you invented online trading, right? So we should talk, just as a novelty, about your new book. The Undoing Project. Now, so tell us how you got into that. It's a little bit different for you from your other books. It's more about psychology. It's a little more academic. But is it really fundamentally a friendship book? It's about friends.
I think it's a love story.
Love story.
When it actually sold the movie, love story. Sure, it is. You're thinking bullshit, but it is a love story. When I was finished it, and it was being sold to for a movie, the Hollywood Reporter called me and asked me, what's the one-line elevator pitch for this book? Like, it's about these two academics sitting in a room dreaming up ideas about how the human mind works. How do you turn that into a movie kind of thing? He's saying, what's your pitch? And I said, well, it's Brokeback Mountain, but they fuck each other's ideas. And that's how I think of this book. That's what it is, and it worked, and that's what it is.
We can delete that line somehow, right? I mean,
nobody.
This isn't
here,
like on the internet or something, is it? Okay.
It's just us friends here, Joe.
Yeah, right. Okay.
There's nobody who'd be offended by that word.
Okay.
And what happened was, the way this story came about, it's about two Israeli psychologists, Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman. I don't know about you, when you're working on a book, I don't like to talk about it when I'm working on it. It's amazing how quickly my books can be described in a way that people don't want to know anything more about them. And really, so Moneyball, what are you working on? A book about baseball statistics. Yeah. No one asks another question. Yeah, but if you want to stop a room cold, if you want to just stop a dinner party, what you working on? It's a book about two Israeli psychologists. That just stops it. Nobody wants to know anything more. But that's what this book is about. Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman. And the way it came about was, it grew out of Moneyball. Moneyball, book about misvaluation of people. Happens to be baseball players, but it's very interesting that baseball players get misvalued the way they did. And they got misvalued by people making intuitive judgments about their value. And I thought that was what the story of the book was. Book comes out, and it gets reviewed by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler. Distinguished legal scholar and behavioral economist. And they say, in the New Republic, and they say, nice story, but Mr. Lewis has missed the point of his own story, basically. That what he's told is a case study. He's given us a case study in the ways the human mind leads us astray when it is operating from the gut, human intuition. And the ways in which the human mind leads us astray were mapped by these two Israeli psychologists, Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, in the late 70s. And I went, oh shit, I missed the story. I thought I didn't know.
Just like when your thesis
I never heard it.
Said, don't be
a
writer,
right.
You get one bad review, or questionable review in the New Republic. You write an entirely new book.
Well, so it was more complicated than that, obviously. But I'd never heard of these guys. Even though the year Moneyball was being written, Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics. And he didn't even know any economics, and that's impressive. It bothered me that I had missed this trick. Like, I like to think, people say that an explanation is where the mind comes to rest. And books are explanations. And what you do with your story is kind of where your mind came to rest. And I like to think I've kind of exhausted the material. I've mined out the material, that no one else can come behind me in my material and find something really great that I didn't find. But this was something really great that it didn't even occur to me, that there's something that we're wired in certain ways, and people have actually figured out how we're wired, that explains the whole Moneyball story. It just bothered me for years. I thought about it. I mean, not constantly, not the way my father watched the stock market, but just every now and then I think, and I mentioned it to a psychologist friend, and he said, in Berkeley where I live, and he said, Danny Kahneman lives half a mile from your house. You can go talk to him about this, get it off your chest. And so that's what I did. I went and knocked on his door, and we developed a relationship. We'd go on long walks through the hills in Berkeley, and he would talk about his now dead colleague, his lover. It wasn't his physical lover, but in every other way, they were just like passionately involved with each other and tumultuously involved with each other, Amos Tversky. And then I said, I don't know when this penny dropped. I taught for a term. Taught's a strong word, but it was called a class at Cal. I was supposed to teach writing, which you don't. I mean, I didn't do a very good job of it. But one of my favorite students was a kid named Orrin Tversky. And it turned out he was Amos's oldest son. And very quickly I saw I had access to both sides of this collaboration. And the material I kept thinking, I'm not the one to write this. This is really interesting, but I don't know. I'm not Jewish. This story takes place in Israel, a lot of it. That's the backdrop, is the birth of the Israeli state in early Israel. I didn't even take Psych 101. I have no particular interest in psychology up to that point. So I was all alien. So it took me forever to talk myself into a place where I thought I should be the one to do it. And what led me to this point, 8 years after I first started walking in the hills with Danny Kahneman, is that the people who knew the story were starting to die. And it was growing clear that if I didn't tell it, it would be gone. It just wouldn't be. And I saw I think it's an incredibly important story. I think their work is incredibly important. It's for the ages. And it's a very emotional story between these two men. So I thought it was an unusual story. So at that point, I turned to Danny Kahneman and I said, it's going to seem odd to you because you know I don't know anything, but I want to write a book about this. And he kind of hemmed and hawed, and he didn't like the idea of it. And so I made a case. I said, you guys, your work is too important. Someone's going to write a book about it, and it's probably, in your view, going to be a bad book. And if anybody should have the right to write a bad book about you, it should be me, because I've spent all these years walking through the hills with you. And so that's how it started.
But he himself wrote a book, or did you ghost write that book for him, Thinking Fast and Slow? I mean, because at the very end of the book, you mentioned that you saw some early chapters of that book. It became a bestseller.
I saw it on its way to the garbage can. When I met him, among the first things out of his mouth was, "You come at a good time because I've just decided they've asked me to write this book, and it's such garbage it's going to ruin my reputation, so I'm not going to. It's going to go in the garbage can where it belongs." And I said, "Could I see a chapter or two?" And he gave me a chapter or two. I said, "Don't throw this in the garbage can." And I watched him. I mean, this is what the quality in Danny Kahneman that is peculiar, that he has to a degree I've never seen in any other human being, is doubt about everything around him, including his own thoughts. And he's like constantly chewing up what he creates before it ever gets out the door. So he got to a point after throwing it away and pulling it out of the garbage can and throwing it away and pulling it out of the garbage can 4 or 5 times, where he said, "I know what we're going to do," because he didn't trust my judgment of the manuscript. He said, "I'm going to give money to a friend of mine who's a specialist in my field, and have him distribute this money in thirds to 3 people he likes, but he's not going to tell me who they are. And their job is to trash the book, to write a negative review from me so I can see how bad it is.
Of Kahneman's book.
His own book.
Yeah.
He paid $5,000 for shitty reviews of his own book to talk him out of publishing it. So this is a peculiar character.
Right. Yeah.
That's what you're looking for.
Genius.
Even better,
Right.
he thinks he's normal. So the best characters, you know this, the best characters don't know their characters. The minute someone knows they're a character, they lose altitude on the page. He just like never, he soared the whole way through. He was just a different person, and he had a lot of different thoughts. And he would never have had the thoughts if he had not had this love affair with Amos Tversky. So anyway, it was a long, torturous path to writing the book because it was even more off my beaten track than usual.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of other opportunities probably offered to you about writing a movie, or I think did you write a novel once? You've played around with it. I mean, and you've all these movies made of your books. So what people want to know is, what is Brad Pitt really like?
Do we want to know? Do we want to know? I can tell you. Yes. So, so before we get into the movie thing, we'll do this. I don't want to create the impression I had anything to do with the movies. I think they're great, but the apropos of this gathering, that the people in Hollywood really prefer that authors be dead. Because all the living author does is cause trouble. He wants credit. He wants to criticize you taking his precious work of art and screwing it up. He wants to tell you who to cast in the picture. He wants to hang around with you. They just don't like you live. And so they convey this. The other odd thing about Hollywood is that they are fastidiously polite. That everybody's almost challenging each other to be the first one to be rude. And when you're in a conversation in Los Angeles, in the movie business, like everybody's showing off how gracious they can be, even while they're sticking a knife in your back. And it's not like Wall Street that way. And so what evolves between a living author who maintains a good relationship with the movie business is this: they pretend to be interested in what you have to say, and you pretend to believe they're interested. And as long as no one thinks there's anything genuine there, the relationship, it can be quite lovely.
Okay.
So that's what happened with Brad Pitt.
Okay.
And the relationship was quite lovely. I don't know if we're going to ever be together again. I hope we are. But I'll tell you a story that encapsulates a part of Brad Pitt. When you meet him, you're supposed to think he must be dumb because he's so beautiful, but he's not dumb. He's very smart. He's very interested in things. He's a delight to talk to. He's easy. He's surprisingly, shockingly normal without being completely normal. But this is a Brad Pitt story. Billy Beane, who Brad Pitt played, wanted nothing to do with this movie, to the point where he refused to go to the set. When they said they were going to make the movie, after I told him he could sell his life rights without any fear of them ever making the movie, because they were never going to make a movie about baseball statistics and it would be all free money, Billy Beane called me up and he said, "You bastard." He was angry. He said, "Brad Pitt just called and he's coming to my house and my wife is putting on makeup and the babysitter's wearing a dress." You bastard, boom. So in the middle of making the movie people who want you to engage in this false relationship where you pretend to believe they care what you think, were getting very uncomfortable that Billy Beane wasn't playing the game. He wasn't coming to the set. He wasn't returning phone calls. He didn't want anything to do with it. They were filming in his office. I mean, they were filming in the Oakland Coliseum for 3 weeks, and his office is right there. And he would refuse to come down. So one day, they call me. "Please, everybody's upset. Could you get Billy to the set?" So I called Billy, and I said, just put everyone out of their misery. Come down for 10 minutes. Nothing bad will happen. Just say hi, smile, be charming, you can leave. And he said, you promise you'll be there? I said, yeah, I'll be there. He wanted someone to basically hold his hand. And so I drive out to the set. And you see the movie? There's night scenes in the Coliseum where they recreated a game between the Oakland A's and the Kansas City Royals, and all these body doubles, 8,000 people in the seats, that they'd move around the stadium to make it look full. I go out with my daughter, Dixie, who's then, I don't know, 9 years old or 10 years old. They just finished shooting one of these scenes where Brad Pitt is moodily walking around the field with nobody in the stands. He comes over, because that's the kind of guy he is, gets down on one knee and starts talking to Dixie. And I leave them alone for 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, Billy Bean's coming out of one door and Dixie's around my leg. And I look down, she got this look of terror in her eyes. She goes, who is that weird old guy? and in walks Billy Bean. Billy comes over. Brad Pitt's vanished. A production assistant with a headgear and he's got a folder with a book in it, comes running over. And he says, Mr. Bean, thank you for coming to the set. We've been waiting for all this time. He says, you're my hero. Your book changed my life. Billy looks at me and says, it's his book. And I said, yes, my book. He says, no, the guy refused. He says, no, it was your book, Mr. Bean, changed my life. Your book. And would you just please sign my book? And he berates him. All right, I'll sign the book. So there were two Billy Beans in professional baseball. They played in the same outfields on the Twins and the Tigers. One spelled it with an E on the end of the bean and one without. The other Billy Bean came out of the closet and wrote a book about coming out of the closet. It was like, playing for the other team, something like that. And hitting from the other side of the plate, I don't know what it was, but it had that kind of title. And the young man flips open the book, and it's the gay Billy Bean's memoir. And Billy Bean's, he's like, there's no right answer at that point, right? And over in the dugout, Brad Pitt is rolling around laughing because he has set the whole thing up as a practical joke, and that was the only reason he wanted Billy Bean to come to the movie.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's Brad Pitt.
That's the Brad Pitt story.
That's the Brad Pitt story.
Yes, I'm glad I asked. Okay. We'll do questions.
Yeah.
So we have microphones. We're going to do questions. So come up and ask a question. I ask, just don't make a speech about how much you love Michael. We know how much you love him. Just
but that's better than the reverse.
Yeah. So yeah. So I think there's microphones. Here you go. Come ask a question.
Are they all up here, or are there some in the back?
All right. I guess I'll start.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I've read several of your books, and it seems to me you have a fairly consistent technique where you very strongly personalize sort of a theme. So you're writing about the emergence of the left tackle as an important player in football and the restructuring of the economics of the game. And so you really drill down on Michael Orr. You're writing about the economics of baseball, it's Billy Bean. You do with The Big Short, you have a couple of main characters, but still very strongly personalizing these larger themes. Clearly there are advantages to that in terms of narrative strength. Talk a little about the pluses and also about the minuses of that approach.
Of writing through people? I don't know any other way to do it. What I have found from the very beginning of my career with Liar's Poker, where I was the main character, and I found myself very easy to sympathize with.
It's a gift.
It was a gift. It was, I felt everything that character felt, and approved of almost everything that he did and said. He's very quotable. So the trick, such as it is, it's a trick, and it's also just how I naturally get interested in things. I get interested through characters, through people. And what almost all the books have in common, aside maybe from a market angle, is they're characters, interesting characters to me in interesting situations. So the trick is that if you can attach the reader to the character at the beginning of the book, they'll follow that character anywhere. Trust me that there is no one in America who would want to read my description of collateralized debt obligations. But once you realize that the lives of these people who you've come to know turn on knowing what that is, you want to know. So it's a very, very powerful device that is at the origins of literature. I don't regard it, though, as, when you say the minuses, what would be the minuses? You place, I guess you could argue that you're kind of placing undue emphasis on a single person when you're dealing with big, but I usually pick my characters who deserve that emphasis. So Billy Beane deserves to be the face of the transformation of baseball through intellect.
Let's go over here.
Anyway.
I just wanted to thank you for Flash Boys on Wall Street and the effect that had. I ended up reading that. I went to school with Ronnie Morgan. That was a coincidence. Went up to IEX, got involved in that whole battle. Fidelity ended up closing my account because I kept insisting I should be able to directly connect to IEX. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, but thank you very much for
talk
highlighting.
about Flash Boys a little bit. Is there a movie of that coming out?
I don't, they never die, but right now it's close to dead. And the problem was revealed in the Sony hack. You remember the hack of the Sony? That there were emails back and forth about how impossible it was to make a movie with an Asian lead. The problem was Brad Katsuyama. They've gotten to the point where they're nervous about making an Asian guy a white guy. A decade ago they weren't. They would have just done that. But they don't think there's a well enough known Asian male actor, which I think is crazy. But it's crazy because the whole point is he's an unknown in real life. So you could echo it in the movie. You could surround him you could create a person. But the Flash Boys story, to me, is still very, very, very much alive and relevant. It's not sorted out. There is a war going on at the heart of Wall Street, and is it going to be properly regulated? It's not. Are narrow vested interests going to queer regulation in a way that essentially causes taxes to be levied on the rest of us? Right now, they are. And Brad Katsuyama and these guys at IX are the single greatest force shining a light on the whole problem and trying to fix it. And I think he's a Canadian, but he's an American hero. And I find his story very moving, but it's one of those things that didn't just, 60 Minutes did their piece. There was a lot of screaming and yelling about it. A lot of people shouted at me that I got it all wrong. No one has demonstrated to me that what they're saying is not true. And it's shocking that the problems haven't been repaired. But I don't know.
Gentleman over here.
Sure, Michael. What are you working on now?
Well, politics has gotten interesting. And I was struck after the presidential election with who got elected president. But it was interesting to me, and I kind of got interested in maybe March, April, the vast yawning gap between the effort that the Obama administration had put into the transition and the Trump administration had put into the transition. And that the Obama administration had created, inspired by Bush, Obama had been very grateful to Bush for how much effort he'd put into handing the government over to him. And Obama had deputed 2,000 or 3,000 people around through his administration to essentially create a short course in how the federal government works, so that in our crazy system, when all these people roll in who don't really know very much about what's going on in the Department of Energy, say, they can quickly get up to speed. And the day after, the assumption was, as in past handovers, that the day after the election, there'd be 30, 40 people from the new administration rolling into every government agency and cramming for 70 days until the inauguration. Because once the inauguration happens, a lot of people who know a lot scatter to the four winds and are actually forbidden by law from getting in touch with their old agencies. So you have a very weird need for a thorough, quick education in really a lot of mission-critical things. And the Trump people literally didn't show. So the parking spaces were empty, the offices that were set aside for the education were empty, and this was it was like non-ideological briefings. I think we're going to pay a big price. This problem is a bomb with a very long fuse, but the ignorance and mismanagement of the government that results from this is a big, big deal. But happily, it's made the material really interesting. I mean, Trump has electrified the federal government. Who would want to read about the Department of Energy a year ago? You wouldn't. But guess what? They preside over the nuclear arsenal. And we have a guy on top who doesn't even know that. And it's kind of incredible, right? I mean, you can't make this up. It's Hollywood comedy after Hollywood comedy waiting to happen. So what I'm doing right now, the Trump administration didn't bother to get the briefings. I'm getting the briefings. So I did this month's Vanity Fair. There's 12,000 words where I run around the Department of Energy and learn, because I didn't know, but I wasn't pretending to run it. But I went and got the briefings that the Trump people didn't get to figure out what the hell this place does, because we need to know. And I'm going to move through the government and do it for the other departments. So that's the project that.
Nice. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question on the Undoing Project and all this behavioral economics issues. You've been in Wall Street in and out for a number of years. You know so much of Wall Street is based on an efficient market. We make rational decisions. What are your thoughts about the impact on that whole business as more of us get to realize that we're driven by idiosyncrasies and irrationality, and we're not as rational as so many people think we are?
So what do I think the impact of behavioral economics will be on Wall Street?
Yes.
You know, if we lived in a sane world, much of what Wall Street does, it wouldn't be doing. Shortly after my father explained to me that the guy charged me $20 to buy the Chart House stock, he did also explain to me that Wall Street floats on bullshit. And it really still does. It's amazing in this day and age that people will give the kind of financial advice they give with a straight face. People will claim to know where the prices of things are going, or have some insight into it, and actually direct people's money on the basis of this insight when they have no idea. They will construct a story about their investment career that seems to demonstrate that they predicted things that were inherently, not only did they not predict them, they were inherently unpredictable. Essentially, random processes are being construed as patterns, and the patterns are being divined by priests, and the priests get paid a lot of money for it. That is crazy. The behavioral economists would have a lot to say about it, but the truth is that people don't like taking responsibility for making their own financial decisions. And so they'll always pay these priests, I think, just to get rid of the problem. They can't get in their heads that not only is that person not an expert, there's no such thing as the expertise. They can get in their heads, oh, he was a bad expert. He lost my money. They can't get in their heads they shouldn't be listening to anybody. And now, so the damage that the intellectual work that grows out of behavioral economics can do to Wall Street, I think that was minimal, because Wall Street it's responding to. a psychological deep need that has nothing to do with reason. So you can't argue it away. So in short, I think the answer is very little.
Where do you invest your money? Just curious. Is it in a mattress, or I mean?
So if saying you think Wall Street floats on bullshit is not saying you don't think the American economy is an incredible miracle and an engine of wealth creation. The economy is wonderful. The American economy is one of the great miracles of human history. And I invest in it, but I don't invest in it under the direction of some Wall Street guru. I think they're two smart things to do. The broad thing is you decide how much you want to put in the stock market and how much you want to put somewhere else. And then after that, how you put it in the stock market, I either buy very low cost index funds, so it's just a basket of stocks, or I give it to Warren Buffett. And I do this by buying Berkshire Hathaway. And this is a basket of stocks that he has, but he's the one person on the planet whose capital has got a different value assigned to it. That people pay more for his money because of his reputation. And he gets deals that no one ever gets. So I long lambasted him for being in this situation, and then I just gave up, and I surrendered. And I'm so happy I surrendered. Yeah. So I own a bunch of Berkshire Hathaway stock.
Okay, all right.
Hi. I wonder approximately what percentage or to what degree you two have prepared or practiced this interview and the response.
Oh yeah. Wait.
That's funny you asked this question. She asked how much we prepared this.
Tomorrow night we're in New York.
Yeah.
Okay. The next night in Boston.
And where were we last night? Hello, Detroit.
No, we did this before at Politics and Prose up the street, but this is a slightly larger crowd.
So I have interviewed Joel on stage about his books. I don't know if you've ever actually talked to me about my books.
This is fake news, okay? I'm always asking you about your books.
We did George Washington when he was the last one we did. He wrote a book about George Washington. You should all buy it and read it.
We only have a minute, a couple minutes. Real quick, by the way, are you still the baseball commissioner or a softball commissioner for your daughter's league?
I retired a year ago because my daughter she outgrew me. But I ran the competitive travel softball program in the East Bay of the Bay Area.
So that must have been a heady thing. I mean, this feeling of power.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Softball commissioner.
No, it was half my life was this. It was this fantastic social experiment. And then we're going to do this and we're going to wrap it up. I think we got to wrap it up. But so I live in Berkeley, which is filled with all these liberal people who don't believe in competition. And so the softball league is a little recreational softball league. It's wonderful. The Albany Berkeley Girls Softball League. And the rule is, if you coach in this league, you have to lose half your games. So if the perfect coach goes 500. However, someone years ago realized that some people had a competitive streak, and so they allowed an organization on the side of it to be formed that after the league concluded, all stars were picked, and they would go out into the wilds of California and play Republicans. And this was always a miserable, it was every game was Custer's last stand. It was a miserable experience. These little girls would be sent off and they get mutilated by these red in tooth and claw Republicans. I took over the operation 7 years ago, and I created liberal warriors.
Okay. Everyone in this room has the same thought. This is his next book. Right?
And we went out and we really kicked some Republican ass. It was really great. And they earned their respect for the first time. So my 15-year-old now, when she was 10, her team was #1 in the country. And we got very, very good. And the way I got good was by going outside of the culture of Berkeley and getting hard-ass college women's softball players who did not want to hear we're going to lose. Can I finish with one little story?
No,
here's the last story.
You've only lost a small fraction.
So when my daughter Dixie's team is going like 40-1, My son, Walker, is 7 years old, 6 years old. He's in the dugout as the bat boy. He's in the dugout as the bat boy, and he's agreed to take this job with his sister's team only because they're winning trophies for the first time, and he gets a trophy. And he's got his wall filled with these trophies now. And Walker was sitting in the dugout with one of these coaches I hired, the one game they were going to lose. They met a team, bad day, superior force. They're down by 6 runs after 2 innings. And he turns to the coach, and he says, Shannon, we're going to lose this game. And she flips. She starts screaming at him, my kid. She goes, if you're going to sit in this dugout and be on this team and be the bat boy, you need to think more positive thoughts. So Walker sits there for a minute and thinks about it, and he says, Shannon, I'm positive we're going to lose this game. And on that note, it has been a pleasure.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for coming.
Right.
Thanks, everyone. That's good.
Thank you.
That's good, buddy.
Yeah, go that way.
All right. I got my books.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.